Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on cybersecurity. We're right at 12 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Josh Antis. I am Financial Education and Community Partnerships Manager for California Coast Credit Union. And just glad you could join us today. We're really excited to share some really great tips with you and some important information. We have a really special guest speaking with us today. So we're ready to share all this info with you. But before we get started, just a few things I'd like to cover with you. Everyone will be placed on mute for the duration of this presentation. However, if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask those either in the question and answer box or in the chat box, and we will be monitoring that and answering your questions either as we go or towards the end of today's presentation. Also, I just want to mention a couple things that we have available for you. First, we have a YouTube channel where a recording of this session will be placed probably by Friday, I would say. That will allow you to view this session again if you missed any information or if you want to go back and take a look at something. We'll have it up on our YouTube channel here so that you can take a look, and that way you don't have to try and track down the PowerPoint or anything like that. So I'll place the link to our YouTube channel in the chat so that way you have that. Also, another link I want to put in the chat for you is for a tool that we have that is available to all of our members. It's a financial wellness platform called Enrich. And it's a place where you can go to learn anything you really want to learn about anything financially related, whether you want to get some resources on budgeting, credit scores, debt management, investing, retirement. There's any number of topics available there. And it's in the form of videos, courses, articles, tools, even games, and it's all free. So I encourage you to go and check it out. Enrich is also doing a monthly challenge right now, so you can enter to win $1,000 if you visit the site. So please take the time to go there and check it out, and you could win some cash. So before I introduce our presenter today, I want to introduce Tim Feria. He's from our business development team. Tim is here if you have any questions in regards to anything that might be, hey Tim, anything that might be related to CalCoast products and services. Tim's been with CalCoast for, gosh, I think as long as CalCoast has been around, basically. And he knows anything and everything there is to know about everything that we offer. So we do have special promotions if you're not a member yet, or we also have promotions if you are a member, if you would like to refer anyone. Tim can help you with that as well. So don't be afraid to ask. We can help you out. And then let's get to our presenter today. So like I mentioned, I'm very excited about our presenter. We have Travis Harrell, our Senior Vice President of IT Engineering and Operations, to speak with us today. And Travis is just an absolute wealth of knowledge. In fact, he probably gets sick of me asking him questions about IT related type things. I'll jump into Microsoft Teams and ask him questions here and there. I probably bug him too much, but he's got a really great presentation for us today. So with that, I will turn it over to Travis.
All right. Well, thank you, Josh. Appreciate the introduction. And by the way, you definitely don't ask me too many questions. I get plenty of those from everybody else as well. But I am always here for it. So, just again, Travis Harrell, Senior Vice President of IT Engineering Operations. The longer the title, I think, the more I know, I guess, is what it is, right? So I've been in the IT industry for about 25 years at this point, through all sorts of different verticals. I've been through the whole channel, I guess, and I've been at CalCoast for just about 2.5 years. Actually, the first financial institution I've been at, and it's been fantastic. So, I want to give a couple tips here. Some of the statistics are a bit alarming. So, if you have a comfort blanket or something like that, you might want to bring it with you. No, I'm kidding. I will give you some tips though to keep you safe. Obviously, I can't give you all of the possible safety tips, but the more you know, the better. So, financial institutions on security. What do we think about? Personally, I think about things like the Brinks truck and a vault full of gold. And this is really how I think of security when I think of banks and financial institutions and credit unions. And of course, we still have all that, except maybe not the gold. But realistically, there's a lot more to it, right? So today's world is so much different from where we were, and we're certainly responsible for a lot more than just protecting your gold from thieves. And at a financial institution like CalCoast, we want to make sure that your data is safe, that your financial transactions are safe, right? It's critical. So we have a number of tools and processes in place. We have audits. We have penetration tests, right? And I can't tell you exactly what we do because then you might know how to weasel your way in. But we definitely have a lot of layers of security. And why do we have it there? Well, there's a number of threats out there. But I would say that ransomware is one of the biggest threats that we have to face as a society. This affects businesses, home users. It affects everybody. And you probably have heard about ransomware, but if you haven't, essentially it's when your data is taken hostage and you have to pay a ransom to release that data. I know that sounds like a pretty awful practice, but it's profitable. And it's so successful that you may have heard of the Colonial Pipeline hack. That happened earlier this year, and it was catastrophic. When that pipeline was taken hostage, there was no oil that was being transported between the pipeline, and gas prices went way up. People panicked. Absolutely insane what the implications were. And it doesn't just happen, to organizations outside of the area. Scripps, one of our local health agencies, they were affected by a ransomware attack a couple months back. In fact, their systems were taken down for about a month. It was very difficult to get an appointment. It was difficult to find your records. Absolute nightmare situation. And as you can imagine, during a time like this where healthcare is so critical, that was just devastating. But losses from ransomware are on the rise exponentially. I would have told you in 2015 that $325 million sounded like a pretty big amount of loss to come from ransomware. But as you can see on this chart, it's just a tiny little fraction of where we are today. It's estimated that this year we're going to experience 20 billion with a B dollars worth of damages from ransomware. And just the ransoms themselves have increased, the individual average ransom payout. So at the beginning of 2018, we were looking at about $1,000 for the average payout. But by the beginning of this year, we're looking at about $54,000 for the average payout. It's hard to say exactly if that means that individuals are paying more or if it's just that they're targeting businesses more. Obviously, businesses have a lot more money to possibly use as a payment. But nonetheless, you wouldn't want to be stuck with a $54,000 bill to try to get your pictures unlocked or your tax returns unlocked. Absolutely a nightmare scenario for any individual, but businesses alike. You can imagine that some of these ransoms are in the millions of dollars, and should you even pay them is a debate that we all kind of have actually in the industry. In fact, the government weighs in a kind of a vague way. They tend to say you shouldn't pay, but at the same time, they also say maybe you should if you really need that information. So definitely a tricky situation you would not want to be in. Why, besides the profits, why is ransomware so proliferated into society, well, a bad actor no longer has to be a programmer or even a hacker to utilize ransomware. At one point in time, that was really the case. You really needed to know what you were doing to deploy this type of software. But like anything with profits to be had, really there's a business model at this point. And what we call ransomware as a service is actually a thing. So think about it like this, right? So software as a service is something a lot of us are aware of at this point. You may use it for your subscription to maybe Office 365 or some other service that you pay. And once you stop paying, the service is over and no big deal. Well, it's a similar situation with ransomware as a service. You pay via some sort of means. I honestly don't know where to go, but I hear it's the dark web generally. And you pay these organizations. I don't want to call them companies to legitimize them, but they're fairly legitimate. You pay them to actually take out this attack on your intended victim. They help you along the process. They have great support teams, probably better than the IT team at many of your companies, sadly. And they will actually help them through the entire process, and they also help the victims. I've heard from victims that some of these support teams are actually very nice. They're very helpful. And if you can imagine trying to explain to your grandmother how to purchase a Bitcoin to pay a ransom, that sounds impossible to me. So these support teams must be amazing if they can walk people through that. All right, so this is scary, obviously, but what could you do to keep yourself safe, right? We all have different ways of preventing all of these atrocities in our daily lives. So what do? Well, first thing I would say is do not rely on any one method of protection, okay? You want to have a multi-layered approach to it. That way, if somebody gets through one layer, they have a whole bunch of other layers to get through before they actually get to what they're looking for, which is your information. And I like to think about it like this. You're driving a car, and a modern car, not some old car from the 50s, right? You're driving a modern car and it has airbags. Well, you don't not wear a seatbelt, right? Because you need those extra layers. And all that equipment aside, you still have to drive safely because doesn't matter how much protection you have, the weakest point is going to take you down. And that brings me to the next point, which is you, specifically you yourself, are the most important element of this, right? The technology can only go so far. There's no perfect solution. You could have all of the best technology out there, the strongest password in the world, but if you give your information to somebody like your password, they can get into your systems and then it's all gone out the window, which is why education on these matters is critical. I'm not going to pretend like I'm the expert of all of this, right? I can only give you some education, but the more education you get, the better. And at Cal Coast, we actually have required trainings for all of our employees that they have to go through to be aware of these threats and arm them with the knowledge that it takes to sort of thwart these attempts at what we call phishing and vishing. Those are our critical key terms here. And if you don't know what they are, phishing is the fraudulent practice of sending an email or a text message or some other digital communication to try to get information from you fraudulently. And vishing is the same thing, but it's from phone conversation. And vishing is actually a little bit trickier to thwart because people don't always expect it, right? People have gotten to the point where they might expect a phishing email, such as what you see here, right? So when you get an email, you want to ask yourself, does the email look legitimate? Are you expecting a file attachment on that email? Is there a strange link in a text message? Do you know the person that's calling you? All of those things help identify whether or not something is legitimate. And some of them are obvious, right? In this example here, you see an email, you can see that the subject has, it's urgent. Well, why is it urgent? Well, and who's it from? I don't know who this person is. And there's a link there. Why do you have to click it so soon, so quickly, right? These are all red flags. And they're getting better, right, with all of these emails, but there's still some way to identify whether or not it's legitimate. And you can always check with the person if you don't know, right? So let's say you might be expecting an email from your friend John, and you get an email and it looks a little weird. Well, call your friend John and say, hey, did you send this email? Is this real? Do that sanity check rather than taking the gamble that it is real. System updates are another critical component to this cybersecurity. Obviously, computers, we've all been dealing with Windows updates for years and years, but mobile phones, right? You don't think about it, but those updates that Apple's pushing and forcing you to click on, they're for a reason. A lot of them aren't just for features and new fun icons and emoticons, right? They are security related. But this also goes into smartwatches and other smart devices, right? Lights, thermostats, cameras, anything that has the ability to connect to the internet in some way is potentially at risk. So I would always advise you, no matter what it is, make sure it's up to date. Check those updates, run them. I know sometimes they can be a pain to wait for. Nobody likes to deal with it. Do it overnight. But get that done. It's at least a good line of defense. But it isn't perfect. Just like all of these, it's not perfect, right? Patches can keep some things out, but not everything. And what happens when things get past that line of defense? Well, that's where antivirus or anti-malware software can really help. I know that Microsoft Windows currently does offer a free antivirus, and honestly, it's pretty good. I would never say to anyone that it isn't good enough, but some people do prefer a little bit more granularity. And in business, right, you may have extra strict rules that you need to impose on your end users. So there's different choices in the antivirus market, but ultimately, you need one of them. And this isn't something that you can have multiples of. You really can only have one at a time. But when you have an antivirus program, at least it's going to make an attempt to stop those malicious processes when they occur. And it generally should alert you that there is a problem. You can do something right away. If you can't stop it, you can unplug your computer from the internet, right? All those things will help. But again, just one more piece. Passwords. I think at this point, we're all tired of your password is not complex enough, or you see that warning on various login signups for various services. But truth of the matter is it's important. If your password is short or doesn't have any complexity in the type of characters, it's going to be really, really easy to compromise. There's lists of passwords all over the dark web that people have, including usernames and email addresses. That stuff gets listed for sale all the time, thanks to, again, bad actors and even some governments in China and Russia and other countries, I'm sure in the United States as well. So make sure your password is secure. And I would advise you to consider using pass phrases like sentences rather than simply words, right? Because if you start putting a whole bunch of crazy characters together, it is hard to remember. And I know you can use password services and key storage to hold those. But, again, if you have a passphrase like, my mother was the best person I ever met, or whatever it may be, right? That long phrase is going to be incredibly challenging to crack, especially if you have maybe a number in there or a capital letter in there. It's going to make it much more difficult. Sounds wild, but it's also going to be easier for you to remember. Now, uniqueness is important as well. If you use the same password for multiple services, say you have the same password for Netflix and the same password for Hulu, if one of those is compromised, you better assume they're all compromised. So if you have unique passwords between those services, you're going to be much better off. I personally use a bit of an algorithm to my passwords, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but that way I can have a different password for different services, but I don't really have to remember exactly what it is. This one is absolutely critical at this point. I can't advise on this enough. Multi-factor authentication, also known as MFA. So think about it like this. If you have a password for a service and you have MFA enabled, even if somebody gets your password and your login information and they try to log in, when they click that button, you're going to get a notification on your mobile phone that says, hey, I'm trying to log in right now. And you might go, no, I'm not, right? I'm not logging in. So you click the button that says, no, I'm not authorized. And that person is no longer able to get into that account that they were trying to get into. I would still advise you to change your password at that point, because obviously they had some information. But nonetheless, this is a big step in thwarting that sort of behavior. And it is possible to crack, just like everything else, but it's much more difficult. So the more of these layers, again, the better. Okay. Being aware. What do you put out there on the internet? I think we have all seen our fair share of family members, maybe that post some wild things on the internet. And that's not exactly what I'm referring to, although I wouldn't say that that's a good thing to do either. But there's a wealth of information about you out there, even on the regular internet. It's pretty easy to find somebody's address or their phone number or even their date of birth. That's a lot of information about you. So anything you can reduce, anything you can do to reduce your exposure is going to help. So, avoid putting extra identifiable information, right? Posting a picture of your social security number on Facebook sounds obvious. Bad idea, right? But even posting that you're going on vacation can be a risk. Is your social media locked down to only your friends? If it's not, if the public can see it, you might have just told some possible criminal that your home is going to be vacant for a couple weeks and you're going to be out of the area. And they probably have the information about where your home is. So think about that when you're posting this information. Really consider looking at who has access to your social media. So look at your privacy settings with regularity. If you're pretty confident that your Facebook or your LinkedIn or whatever it may be is locked down to only specific people that you know, then you might as well tell them you're on vacation. All right, sanity here. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I think your mom probably told you this as a kid, but I can't tell you enough how many people are fooled by this, and I don't quite understand why. It's not really very likely that you're going to get a free trip to Hawaii or an iPhone for $50, right? That just doesn't happen. So take a step back if you get an offer like that and think, why? Why on earth am I getting this? Is this real? And just because you're getting that doesn't mean it's necessarily dangerous or malicious, but it likely is. They're likely trying to collect information at the least. But at the worst, they could be looking for your identification info to actually spoof your identity. So be extra careful about that. Mobile device security. Okay, so we think about computers. I mentioned this earlier. We think about computers a lot, but we don't think about the computer that's in your pocket that can fall out at any time. And it has probably more data than your actual computer that's collecting dust in your office at home. So be careful with your device. Use a PIN code, a lock code. Any sort of method of security is better than none. I know a lot of them are forced now, so that's good. But if you have an older device, make sure you enable that. But another tip there is if it is lost or stolen, wipe it. Wipe that device. Apple, Google, maybe BlackBerry if they still exist. There are ways to track that device as long as you've got that enabled to then wipe it. And again, you could track it to see where it is, but I don't necessarily think it's in your best interest to go, on some renegade mission to recover your device from a criminal. I think the best bet is just to wipe it, accept that it's gone, file a police report. At least your data is safe. And finally, public Wi-Fi. I'm guilty of using it. I think we all are. And I'm not saying never use it, but we definitely want to be cautious about it. And it's handy, right? Public Wi-Fi at a hotel or an airport or anywhere. It's really helpful to be available. But if you have the option of using a cellular device like your cell phone and tethering, or even a MiFi, you're probably going to be better off because you really don't know how safe or secure that public Wi-Fi is. And if you can't avoid it, I would suggest that you consider using something like a VPN. There are VPN services out there that you can pay a subscription to, and when you do that, at least your traffic that you're sending back and forth on that public Wi-Fi is encrypted and much harder to see by a bad actor. So, again, all of these steps together make you the safest. If you can't do them all, at least try to do one or two or three or four of these because they layer on top of each other. And really, that's it for my tips today. I want to thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to pass this back to Josh for a moment. Thanks again.
All right, thank you so much, Travis. A lot of great information. Just to mention one more time, this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel. We'll have a recording of it up there live, so you can take a look at it again in case you missed anything. But in the meantime, Travis, we do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is if there's a way to remove the personal information about you that is currently available on the internet.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Your best bet is to go through any of the services that you do have and lock down your privacy settings. That helps. You can oftentimes, I search for myself. I Google myself. And please don't do this after the fact. Don't Google me. No, I'm kidding. But when you do that, you see what's available, right? And you can go into those various services and request that your information is not shared. I know in California, we've got some pretty, I don't want to say great, but we've got some pretty interesting privacy laws that make it so that you can request that your information is wiped from those services. So any legitimate business has this option if they're doing business in California. So that helps. And a lot of these services are absolutely doing business in California. But unfortunately, it's not the easiest process, right? You're going to have to go through manually. I haven't checked lately, but I imagine there are some services, some paid services that could go through and do that. But yeah, hopefully that helps.
All right, thank you. On a different note, we had a question in regards to like an app or services that save and keep your passwords for you. Are those worth it?
Yeah, so I see that they're asking about ESET specifically. I would say any of the major security platforms are pretty great these days, as long as you update them. If you don't update them or you don't pay for them, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad at detecting the information that's malicious. But I would suggest that ESET, absolutely great. As for LastPass, yes, you're playing a dangerous game no matter what you do, right? And obviously, if you have your passwords in a password service and that password to get into that service is breached, then somebody could have access to all of your passwords. Dangerous, but at the same time, it's probably better than having weak passwords. So my suggestion would be to enable multi-factor authentication for your password service. I personally do that. And although it's an extra step when you need to retrieve those passwords, at least it's much more difficult for the attacker to get that information.
And how do you activate the MFA?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's going to depend on what you're trying to activate it on and which services. So almost any bank these days or credit union is probably going to require it, and they're going to force that in on any new accounts or any accounts in general. But anything else that has confidential information stored about you, I would suggest going into the settings of that site or that app and seeing if there's an option for MFA to enable. A lot of the legitimate organizations these days, Microsoft, they're really pushing it, but not everybody has it. So MFA is not enabled everywhere. And again, I wish there was a magic button. You could just say MFA for everything, but unfortunately, it is on a service by service basis.
All right. And a question about VPNs. What are they, and can you use them in foreign countries?
All right. So hopefully, I'm not trying to help a criminal along this question. No, I'm kidding. So VPN is a virtual private network, and most people know about VPNs because that's how oftentimes you connect to your work network. And the reason you use them to connect to your work network instead of just having your work connected to the internet is it's a private connection between one device and the other device, and it's encrypted on both sides. So just having that encryption helps because it encapsulates all your data within this encrypted tunnel that people can't actually see the information of usually. And yes, there are a number of services out there. I would recommend doing some research though to see which is right for you if you want to use a VPN for your own browsing. But yes, oftentimes you can use them in other countries, and oftentimes you can use them to, I will say, make it look like you're in another country. And so I wouldn't advise doing that, right? You want to follow your local laws and the country's laws. You don't want to try to get arrested in some strange manner. But VPNs themselves are legal to use, and I do advise the use of them.
Okay, and a couple more questions just came in as well. Do you recommend that no passwords are loaded in a file document on your personal computer?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say I do not recommend doing that. I know a lot of people that do that, and I can even admit I was guilty of it at one point in time, probably years ago, right? And I just don't recommend it because if that document ever gets exposed or hacked, then somebody has access to a number of passwords.
All right, and then actually the second note, I guess, was not a question. It was just kind of a comment that on the subject of wiping out your personal info, we often forget to delete our Bluetooth connection in the rental cars when returning them. So just something to
that is a great
everyone.
tip, and it's something that I do myself. Any rentals, I delete my devices off of there. Now, it is possible that leaving it on there, they may not get your information, but you just don't know. So it's better to be safe.
Okay, so I think we'll leave it open for another minute here to see if there's any other questions. In the meantime, I did want to mention again that Tim Feria is available for any questions you might have in regards to our products and services or any of the financial education or wellness resources that we have available. Both Tim and I are available, so please feel free to ask questions. I did include Tim's contact information in the chat box as well, so if you would like to contact him, he can help you out again with any of your account needs. And it looks like that's all we have for questions right now. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Travis, again, thank you so much for presenting today and for all the great info.
Hey, thank you,
And
Josh.
of course, and thank you again to everyone for joining us today. Keep an eye out for upcoming emails to announce our webinars moving into the last part of the year. I can't believe September is coming up already, but keep an eye out, and we'll continue to have these webinars monthly. But until then, everyone stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.